Good evening. I am Paula Gottesman, and on behalf of my family and the Greater Metro West Jewish Communities Federation of Foundations, I welcome you to this special program in honor and remembrance of Bob Max. I knew Bob and his wonderful wife Shirley for over 40 years. They were respected, admired, and tireless workers for their civic and Jewish communities. Bob's countenance and manner never revealed or defined his early life experiences. It was only a few years ago that I first heard Bob speak about his time in captivity in a Nazi slave labor detail. He was captured during the Battle of the Bulge in World War II. And in violation of the rules of war, the Nazis made slaves of some captured military personnel rather than send them to a POW camp. Bob was encouraged to write The Long March Home about his ordeal. Needless to tell those of you who have already read the book what a horrific experience he endured. Bob said that sometimes even he himself could not believe that he survived. But we are here tonight to celebrate Bob, not because he survived, not because he suffered, but because of the man he became in spite of this, and how he led a successful life with dignity, humility, and compassion, and gave so much of himself to others. Always a gentleman, we remember Bob not as a victim, but as one who did not let his tormentors define him. He triumphed over them and thus became a true hero.
Good evening, and thank you, Paula, for being here with us and sharing those beautiful words about Bob and the impactful life that he lived. It was truly touching to hear from you. Before we begin, if you would like to view closed captioning during the program, please click on live transcript on the bottom of your Zoom box and then choose subtitles. I am Elise Shane-Brown, the Director of Holocaust Education for the Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West. We are thrilled to be joined tonight by Backpacks for Life, a nonprofit organization that seeks to provide personalized support to at-risk and homeless veterans who are truly struggling on their path to re-enter civilian life. By providing backpacks with daily essentials, along with guidance from mentors, Backpacks for Life truly does all that they can to help veterans lead the best life that they can. Last week, on the evening of November 9th, we marked 83 years since the Kristallnacht pogroms that targeted the Jewish communities across Germany, Austria, and Czechoslovakia. 2 days later, on November 11th, we observed Veterans Day in honor of all the veterans of the United States that have served the United States. Having known Bob Max so well, of blessed memory, I am confident that he would have been touched, privileged, and thrilled for us to have combined the importance of both days into an evening in tribute of Bob. Bob was immensely proud of his service in World War II, his Jewish heritage, and the importance of remembrance of Holocaust education. And he certainly knew how to make others feel the same about those things. My most treasured times with Bob were as we drove back and forth to schools around the area so that he could tell countless students his story. Each time on the way there, he would hope that he would get through to them and that he would speak well. And as we returned back home, he would always marvel at how well it went. He truly had a gift to influence others in the most positive of ways. And I really do miss those drives together. As we gather here tonight, we do so to remember all those lives that were lost on Kristallnacht, during the Holocaust, and throughout World War II. We remember the men, women, and children, the grandparents, mothers, fathers, daughters, and sons, cousins, aunts, uncles, and friends. We recall all those that risked so much, as Bob did, to fight against the tyranny of the Nazis. In their memory, we light this yahrzeit candle tonight. During this evening's program, I am privileged to welcome our panel speakers. Greg Parker, the director of the film. Henry Bassman, Vietnam veteran, captain in the U.S. Army and friend of Bob's. Linda Forgash, the director of the Jewish Historical Society. And Sergeant Brett D'Alessandro, Backpacks for Life founder and president. Each of them has a special relationship to Bob, as well as the film. And I look forward to hearing from all of you this evening. After I ask a few questions and answers, if time permits, we will have questions for you to put, our audience, to put in the Q&A. Please make sure to write which panelist you would like to answer the questions. Good evening, everyone. It's so nice to be here with all of you. Okay, the first question is for Sergeant Brett D'Alessandro. So your first question is, what made you want to start the documentary for Bob Max? Because we know you were kind of the push to begin this.
The start, you know what? I was just getting done with work and my buddy called me, who runs another nonprofit, the New Jersey Veterans Network, and said, I have this guest speaker that I need you to go pick up. You got to bring him to the school and he's going to talk to the students.
So sure, you got to have those drives too.
Yes, this was the drive I did not expect to have. And this is kind of the seed that really started it all. So I said, sure, I'll go pick up this guest speaker. He didn't tell me the name, who it was or anything. So I get to this house and I just remember opening the door and I just saw this big smile and Mr. Max he was right there front and centered. And I'm like, oh, I'm here to pick you up. And he goes, great. What's your name? I'm like, I'm Brett D'Alessandro. What's yours? And he's like, I'm Robert Max. I'm like, nice to meet you, Mr. Max. I was like, so let's get in the car. And so I have a Jeep Wrangler, by the way. So I actually had to pick him and put him in my Jeep. So, we're sitting there talking. I'm like, so, you're a vet? And he says, yes, I'm a vet. And I'm like, that's great. Thank you for your service. And from there, we just started to talk. And I told him how I was in the nonprofit world helping out individuals. And he's like, same. And I'm like, this guy's a really cool guy. And so we really started talking. And after I 20 minutes in of this ride, I was like, this is a hero. I'm in, like, this person in my car is like, this is like LeBron James sitting in my car right now for the basketball world. I was like, this is pretty cool. So we get to the school, he talks, tells a story. All these kids come up to him and sign his book. And I don't know, it was great. Everybody had a blast. And so I was driving him home and I was like, this needs to be heard by the world. Do you have like a video, or is there like online content? He's like, yeah, there's videos here and there. And, I've been in countless news articles and I was like, that's great. But like a full-fledged documentary. He's like, no, I never, done something like that. I'm like, I'm going to do it. And he kind of looked at me like, okay, like I literally just met you, what's going on? I'm like, I'm doing this. Like, I have to do this. This story needs to be told. These kids, they understood it, but I feel like it's faded from the true understanding of what really happened. And everybody knows what happened, but I feel like it's not as forefront as I really want it to be. And so I was like, I got to tell this story. So I told Mr. Max, I'm like, I'm going to find funding. We're going to get this going and we're going to put a whole documentary ready to go. I have somebody that we can find. And he's like, yeah, let's do this. And from there, we were talking every day. Literally, I was going to his house, calling him every day. And every time I called him, he would literally do this like Santa Claus laugh. It was like 2 or 3 laughs. Ha ha ha. Brett. And I was like, this is literally like, this is the coolest guy ever. It was just amazing. And so that's kind of how I met him and why I really wanted to start this documentary.
That is a good story. And those car rides, as those of us that got to take them, they were definitely special. So right. I'm fortunate enough to have had them and so glad that you did as well to make this incredible film. Our next question is for director, Mr. Greg Parker. What was it like to prepare to shoot and make this documentary? What were the preparations that you had to do?
Yeah, so the first thing that we did was we had a an in-person meeting that Brett and Alexa had reached out to us, and we worked with them before, and Brett gave me that same spiel. He said, listen, you got to come hear this story. And we did. We drove to Mr. Max's house, and we met him, sat down, and basically as close to what's in the ending documentary is kind of what I experienced, because he sat down and we talked for a little bit, and then he started to tell his story, and he was staring at me the entire time that he was telling his story directly to me, and I was looking at him, and I was this needs to be encapsulated. Him telling this story to a certain individual, like directly to somebody, it definitely does need to be told. So after that part of hearing him tell the story, we left. He gave us his book. I read his book, and then watched the online speeches that he had done that are on YouTube, that you can see of him telling to other school kids. And when he was telling that story, it's like everything disappeared from him, and I was just seeing his face as he was telling it to me in person, and I was like, there's got to be a way to capture that, which is why the background in it is just a black background. It's very simple. We don't need to see anything else. I was trying to encapsulate what was it like to be in person with him telling that story,
which we know is so important, because that's what we don't have anymore. So incredible that you were able to capture that.
Yeah, thank you for that. But yeah, that's basically how it all started.
Well, thank you. Our next question is for Captain Henry Bassman. What impact, we know you're a veteran yourself as well, different war, but a veteran. What was your impact, the impact of you on Bob's story? Like, where did you fall into meeting Bob and having this alter and change your life as it changed so many others? Mr. Bassman, you're still on mute.
Right. Sorry.
That's okay.
I first met Bob when we were both members of Temple Sinai in Summit. And he was a prominent member of that synagogue, very highly respected, former president. And I knew him by a handshake. One day he called me up and asked me to go to the Robert Treat Hotel with him for a luncheon in commemoration of Holocaust Memorial Day. So I said, okay, sure, I'll be happy to go. And I went to the ballroom in the Robert Treat Hotel, and it was filled with high school students from Newark. And Bob got up and told his story. It was the first time I had heard it, and I was absolutely enthralled and moved. And Bob and I related to one another off and on. And then when I became commander of our local American Legion post, we became much more friendly, went to lunch, did a few things. I participated in his third bar mitzvah, which was a wonderful event. And I felt his story was crucial, because I had known about the Holocaust and what it did to our people since I was a young child. But to learn that the brutality of the Nazis extended not just to Jews and gypsies and homosexuals and people who had mental problems, but to anybody who was not them. Anybody who was not a member of their group was doomed. Because Bob told me that when he was first brought to the slave labor unit, they didn't even check his dog tags. They didn't know his name. And so consequently, they didn't know he was Jewish. They just knew he was an American, and he was not a German, and he was not a member of their group. And it's instructive, I think, on a global scale, because it tells us to beware of all totalitarian and doctrinaire regimes, because they are based upon exclusivity and contempt and hate for people who don't belong to their group. And if the Holocaust has taught us anything, it's taught us that when one group is persecuted, then a lot of other groups are persecuted. And so it was a very moving lesson that went beyond my experience as a child. And you know, the other thing about it is, when I grew up, all the men, practically all the men, were veterans of World War II. They were heroes. We looked up to them. They had this bond, this camaraderie that was unique. And Bob was one of the last remnants of that great generation. And I treasured him, not just because he was Bob, which was an amazing thing, but because he was a memory for me of the people who accomplished such great feats against such odds, 5-1 outnumbered in the Battle of Bulge, and that didn't stop them. So those were my thoughts about my relationship with Bob.
Thank you. And that is truly a special and unique relationship, and we're privileged to have you with us today. We have a next question is for Linda Forgosh, the director of the Jewish Historical Society. Linda, I think actually you might have been one of the first people to actually introduce me to Bob. So what an honor to have you here with us tonight. Your first question is, I know you were very involved because before the film, Bob had written his own autobiography. What do you know? Can you share with us what prompted Bob to write his autobiography to begin with? Because we know he did that much later in life.
Good evening. Can you hear me? I see the yellow square, so I guess I'm on Hollywood Squares.
Yeah.
Yes. I think in my mind, one of the interesting things about the Bible book, The Long March Home, was Bob's explanation why it took him 53 years to write his recollections of being in the Nazi slave labor camp, and what it was that pushed him over. And that was actually his grandsons who asked, and I'll quote Bob now, "Were you in the war, Poppy?" They call Bob Poppy. 9-year-old Emerson asked, "And where did you sleep? And what did you eat? And did you have a gun? And did you kill anybody?" And of course, that triggered Bob. Yeah, now's the time to tell my story. Sometimes something that is so earth-shattering and life-threatening maybe sits there until the time is right. But what I think people do not know, and I don't remember reading it here, is Bob did not have to serve in the military. He did not have to go to Europe, because when he entered the Army at the age of 19, he was a hotshot clarinet player, and the Army put him in the Army band. And so he could have stayed there, entertained the troops, but his decision, because we spoke about it, he said, I know that my people are being threatened. I know this country is being attacked from forces that are not to my liking. And hence he literally said, I'm leaving the band, the boys in the band, and I'm going overseas. And this put everything into motion. So he did not have to go, which makes him, to me, even more a hero, a lover of his country.
Very true. I used to speak about that often in my times with him, that it was his choice to do this because he felt very strongly about it for his country and for his Jewish people, knowing a little bit of what was happening in Europe. So I find that remarkable. Thank you, Linda, for sharing. Brett, we have a question for you. Can you tell us a little bit about your relationship? I know you talked about your drives and the speaking, but as you got to know each other more, how did that impact you as a veteran yourself, as having been in the Army? And how did that impact you and how you see yourself going forward and your role in the community?
So, yes, we talk basically every day just about how we can put together this documentary, but it became much more than that. I mean, when I had difficult days, I would call Mr. Max and just kind of talk to him. I mean, we became really good friends. It's definitely two different wars. I was, the war on terrorism. I went to Afghanistan. We had similar situations where I volunteered to join the Marines, and then I got a call in school from my gunny, said, "You want to deploy to Afghanistan?" I said, "Sure." So I dropped out of school. So we had a very similar situation in regards of how we entered, our two very, different wars. But, it was just really a friend. It was somebody I could just talk to. We talked about, what was going on. I'm a human. I had stressful situations. I got upset and, depressed at times. And he was just somebody I could call and rely on. And man, I still have my 2 voicemails from Mr. Max that I listened to, and it's just that chuckle, the 3 chuckle laugh before he would answer the phone, and it was just a beautiful soul. And what happened in the war was obviously, I mean, he's a hero in that regards, but it's much more than that. I mean, he dedicated his entire life after the service of serving others, and it didn't matter what they looked like or who they were, or he was somebody that could have been totally different in regards to who he was, but he would still help them. And I just think that was, I mean, he's somebody that you would quote from, like, the Bible. I mean, he's just an amazing person, and somebody that would always put somebody above them himself. And he just was really good friend. And because of that, I wanted to, I mean, I would have put my own money into this to get this documentary going. I mean, I wanted this to happen and make sure everybody can continue to hear Robert Max's story from years after he was gone. And so yeah, he was just a really, really good friend to me. And I promised Mr. Max that I would continue to tell his story. And I mean, he's a brother in arms, and I will never go off on that, back on that promise.
Thank you so much for that. Greg, in making the film, can you share a little bit about how, because making films is what you do, and we always know working with people, but obviously we know that Bob Max was a special individual and different. Can you talk a little bit about how it worked with you and him in making the film?
Yeah. So like, what was it like, filming with Robert Max? It was very surreal, being behind the camera for this. And I noticed from that first time, speaking with him, that he liked looking at a specific person and a specific face that he could be telling that story to. So that was one of the, one of the main goals, was not to have him staring at a piece of glass, not looking just at a lens. So we utilized the technique of using a teleprompter, but instead of having words on it, he'd be looking at, a live human face. So he was able to, again, tell his story and then look at me during it. But what's behind the projected glass of a live view of me, nodding and listening to his story was the actual lens. So he's telling that to, all future people who would be watching that. And, one of his things that he says, not even just in the documentary, but that he's, mentioned many times, is that one of his main goals was prolonging, the memories of the Holocaust. And that was something that we really wanted to get across within, his telling of that, and being able to utilize something that would keep his attention directed onto somebody who was, giving those social cues that you have when speaking to another human during that, and being able to encapsulate him telling that story and help him, move the story along there. That was one of the ways that we did that, on the technical side. And on the opposite side of that, the weight of what he was talking about, and filming during the process of that, and feeling that it was very special, and it was very extremely deep. And I hope part of that is what gets, across to the viewer when watching it.
Thank you. It certainly did. Our next question is for Mr. Bassman. Can you tell us about the friendship you developed with Bob Max and how that changed you and your future over the years? You're still on mute again. We still have to get used to it.
I should know better.
No, go right ahead.
Be very really open. Like most veterans, Bob and I shared some element of PTSD. And I'm sure that pertained to Brett as well. Brett, as a Marine, was in some pretty tough places. And what struck me was, in spite of the horrific experience he had as a slave laborer, he had this tremendous zest for life, this joyous way of being, that just when you were with him, you couldn't help but reflect that and adopt that same kind of a way of being. And that kind of infectious charm that was not put on, that was totally honest, just endeared, I think, him to everybody who met him. We would go to lunch, we would sit together. I would go visit him in his house, and we'd sit and we'd talk about world events. And every time he told me his story, it was like unraveling an onion, because there would be some other detail that he would add to the story. And so it was always interesting to visit with him, because you would always learn something from him about his experience. So I cherished him. I just wish he could be here today. I wish I could talk to him. He was a really meaningful and powerful human being. And his power didn't come from money or position. It came from within his heart, within his way of being.
Certainly. And I know for myself, and from when my family would meet with him, we would always say it was incredible that no matter how many times it was, you always learned something new. And that was something that truly made Bob Max very special. Linda Forgosh, if you would be so kind, we have another question. Bob Max was a remarkable speaker, and he spoke to so many school-age children from young to older about his experiences. I know there's one in particular that he spoke about that caught his attention. Can you share a little bit about that one with us?
Yes. Bob delighted in speaking with youngsters, oldsters, college classrooms, you name it. He was the first one to talk, and he was engaging in everything that he did. He just had this effervescent ability to communicate. He liked best of all speaking to young students. The society, meaning the Jewish Historical Society, has a Robert Max collection, and in it are maybe 80, 100 letters that these youngsters wrote to thank him for the time he spent speaking with him. But one in particular really caught his attention. On the way out the door, this young man, whose name I don't recall, I don't remember if I was ever told what it was, said to Bob, "Mr. Max, based on what I hear you tell me, would you do this over again?" And it didn't take Bob a split second, and he said, "Yes, I would." Zemayesh.
That is a truly special story, and it's remarkable to know that he would have done that all over again. We do have a few questions coming in the Q&A, so I'm going to stop my questions and go to them for a few moments in the interest of time. If anybody else has questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box. The first question we had, and I mean, this really could be open to anybody if they know the answer. I know partly it. Any of our panelists, do you know, did Bob maintain any contact after the war with any of his fellow soldiers or anyone who fought with? Linda, thank you. Yeah.
No, I asked him that question. He said no. He hadn't.
I asked him that question a few times also, and he said he had not. He had spoken to and met with, in his travels, many other veterans at times, but nobody particular that he knew and met with. The next question, I'm guessing, is for you, Greg. Was the film done all at once or over a period of time?
So the actual filming of it was done over the course of 2 days. We had the majority of the film that you'll end up seeing, about 70% of it or so, was from the first day of interview. And, you know, I would have liked to kept going and, you know, go forever, but he was also, you know, a man of 96, and, you know, a day could take a toll on him as well. So we tried to be very, you know, cognizant of that throughout the period, but we ended up filming, you know, as much as we could, and it was fantastic what we ended up getting. But we did set up a second day about a month later, where we'd also go to the museum and kind of complete the remainder of the telling of the story, as well as the few ending shots that we have of him sitting there surrounded by the exhibit at the museum. So it did the filming with Bob specifically was over the course of those 2 days. And at the end of that second day, I didn't get to take a car ride with him, but I got to see Brett help him into Brett's truck. And that was a great experience to see the two of them together going through that.
I just like to quickly add, it was, 2 days of filming him, but months of working on the documentary, especially with the animated part. And
yes.
Yes. So even getting prepared to do the film, I would say it took us just over a year, about 13 months of preparing. So yeah, those 13 months for 2 days of filming, and then a heck of a lot of other time involved in the animated part and putting it all together.
Yeah, I didn't want to give the impression that it's done in 2 days. It was 2 days with Mr. Max himself doing the filming.
Right, of course.
Yeah, it doesn't.
So the next question actually somewhat relates to that. Somebody is asking about the animation and how those sections of the animation were created.
Sure. Yeah. So that was a lot of trial and error that we had. My main goal in that was wanting to get the visual idea of what a memory looks like. And then, it's a nice thing to say, but then when you have to actually do it, I was a big fan of, Ken Burns documentaries and whatnot. And, he's always able to pull from historical photos and videos, mainly photos, but to be able to, utilize them throughout a documentary. And in Mr. Max's case, there is a lot of, archival footage and photos of, World War II specifically. But Mr. Max's story is such a linear story, for him, that we didn't want to, use some historical video and then other things that might relate to him and relate to slave labor overall, but not specifically his story that he went through. So we didn't want to use some photos and then go into pictorial animation or something. We wanted to keep, the documentary very linear to you're seeing him or you're seeing this visual representation of as closely as we can get to his memory. And, by doing that, we had to create each one of the things, even though it looks very two-dimensional, we had to create each one of those aspects in 3D. And then we had to go through the arduous process of finding out, what frame rate kind of works well to a memory. It's not specifically at 24 frames per second. And then on top of that, our animator Zoran came up with the effect of running frame by frame and rendering out frame by frame in a batch capture, the ability to make each frame semi look like a painting, which is slightly distorted, almost a watercolor with the painting mixed to it. And we went through many iterations of that until we found something that we were like, okay, we think we're onto something here, and then moved in that general direction. And by the end, we were very happy with it, but it was a very difficult. It's not as easy as it might look.
Yeah, I know. Of course, we know so much goes into that. There's another question we have. I would think, Linda, you might be able to answer this, and it goes along with the first question. Those of us that have seen the film and read his book and know Bob's story, he was helped by a family in his escape, as we know, as so many other survivors were, and we thank all those saviors. Linda, do you know, or anybody else know, if he ever found that family or contacted them or knew anything about them?
I don't recall it that vividly. But certainly the book explains, how they welcomed him. They understood that these were Americans. They were there to save their country. And so they put them in the barn and they kept things quiet, and things went forward.
Yeah.
And of course they fed them. I don't know whether it's a point to say nothing pejorative about hospital food, but after Bob, 3 months of being in slave labor, was able to escape, eventually winding up in an army hospital, looking to cure him. Remember, he had lost maybe 50 pounds. I think he came into the hospital at 85 pounds. Somehow that number strikes me. But I think, because I don't want to not tell this story just a little bit, The question was, is that he couldn't gain weight on hospital food. When he came back to the States, who was going to make sure that he was fed the right way? I know this sounds incredible, but it was Jenny Grossinger. She invited Bob to her hotel where he spent 1 week, he spent 2 weeks, and it was just the right kind of food. And suddenly the reverse came, but I thought it was sweet. I think on the market now, if you could get a copy of Jenny Grossinger's original cookbook with the things that Bob ate, you could probably make a pretty penny.
I'd just like to add, I mean, Bob, he didn't talk about this for years. It wasn't like, you know, he got back, you know, and better from the hospital and started, so he didn't talk to anybody. He just didn't want to be involved in this kind of military circle. So yeah, he really didn't talk about it for years after. And at that time, you know, he definitely just lost contact with these individuals, but still retained the knowledge of what happened.
Yes, it is incredible the knowledge that he retains and was able to share with so many others, and even as he made the film. And this is actually related to the next question. Did Bob Max, was he able to see the film?
You know what? So yes, Mr. Max was able to see the film, and it's pretty incredible because he was, I mean, he told me personally, he's like, I'm holding on until this film is complete. He's like, I will do anything in my power to, you know, stay on this beautiful earth and to complete this film. And I believe it was a couple months after he saw the documentary, he passed away, or can somebody clarify that? I know it was within a couple months.
It's very, yes.
He
yes.
did see it. And the truth be told, and I can tell tales out of school, forgive me, Bob, he forwarded it over to me and he said, "Mum's the word." So I did see it.
Yes, and that was one of the things when we did send it to him. We said, listen, make sure not to share it with everybody and whatever. So yes, if you were sent it to it, I can definitely see the mum's the word. And I actually have written down the exact thing that Alexa had forwarded me, an email from Mr. Max, and he said, "I am so pleased with the film. You've not only presented and preserved a unique story, but also captured the imagination of the viewer through the visual and vocal combination." And I was just like, I took that, I saved that, I put it in my heart, and I was like, I'm never forgetting that. It was the main goal of this thing from my end was not only I wanted to make, you know, Brett and Alexa and the Gottlieb Foundation, everyone really like it, but it was really like the last thing I would ever want is Mr. Max to look at it and go, you kind of missed the mark. You know, it was being like, I want him to sit down and see this and be like, wow, that's what it's like to experience me telling this story. And the fact that he was, you know, he gave his approval on it, that's the highest mark I ever wanted. And I'm so glad that he got to see it.
I think one of the things that's remarkable about this film is World War II veterans were notorious for not sharing their stories. Bob shared his story. Now we have a film of it, a record of it. And this is one story for which we have a record, but it's representative of thousands of other stories that we don't have, that are lost. When I meet young people who say they have members of their families who served in the military, I ask them, well, what did that person do? Father, grandfather, uncle, aunt? And they say, we don't know. I said, well, you've got to go ask. That's part of your heritage. You've got to ask them, what unit were you in? That's the opening remark. And if you'll notice, one of the first things that Bob mentions in the film is that he was a member of the Third Army. And everything else springs from that. So I would say to any of the viewers, if a member of your family served in the military, ask them to tell you their story, because everybody's got a story.
Yes, that is so important. And I stress that all the time with everyone. It's so important to hear those stories and to continue to tell them. Before we continue, Bob's daughter, Wendy, thank you, Wendy, for chiming in. She said that she does not believe he ever found that family. He did return to the area, but it wasn't until about 1974. So he did not ever, as far as she knows, he did not ever find that family. So thank you for sharing with us. We have a time for one more question before we watch our video tribute. Is it possible, where is the documentary available now after this evening? Is it possible to see and share it?
It is absolutely possible to share. It is free. It will always be free. And I want to make sure everybody has the opportunity to have access to the documentary. So it is always free, and feel free to share it with whomever you would like to share it with.
I think if it's okay with you, Elise, that I mentioned to the viewing audience that one of the things that Bob wanted most was to share that history in the state of an exhibit. So there is an exhibit called The Long March Home, located at the New Jersey Historical Society, 52 Park Place in Newark. And there you can see his uniform, the boots they had taken from him, his medals, and the multiple letters he sent every day to his parents just to keep them updated on what was going on, photos. But what stays in my mind, maybe Bob put the war behind him, not deliberately, but because he vowed if he could survive it, that he would become a Jewish community leader, that his life would be spent helping others. And he certainly did. He was the president of everything that walked or talked in Greater Metro West. And it was what defined him. I don't think he wanted to be defined by the war, in my opinion. He wanted to be defined for the lessons that he learned of how the world needs to open its arms to those who are experiencing terrible, terrible things, which seems to be not unusual, as the case may be. And I have one last thing to say. There is an artifact that I would love to own, but I don't think I stand a chance. I always knew when Bob was in the Federation building that he was coming my way for whatever reason. I would pull up and I would see his very big car and check out his license plate. And it said, I am R.R. Max, like I'm Robert R. Max. To me, the R middle initial always stood for remarkable.
One last thing I have to say. I just thank you so much. I literally thank you for putting this all together. Paul Gosman, like, thank you so much for making this happen. I appreciate you putting your trust in us to getting this done. I mean, all of you are just phenomenal people. Linda, you're amazing. Henry, thank you so much for your service. We really appreciate you and your service. And Greg, I don't know why you continue to trust us. You know, I appreciate it. And thank you for always having faith in us. It really means the world to me for all of you putting in this time and effort for us to continue to share Mr. Max's story.
And thank you, because this wouldn't have happened, and it wouldn't have gotten, if you didn't get in that car and you didn't say, oh, we need to do this, you and Alexa, you know, it wouldn't have happened. So
yes. And thank all of you so much for being here with us this evening. And Linda, you are so right. So much of what Bob was and who he was in service to others, not what he had done in the war, but how he took that to serve the community around him. And I know, being a part of this evening, all of us that have done that in our own worlds and communities and come together for this night, I'm sure it is such a pleasure for him to see. So before we conclude, we're going to share a video tribute to Mr. Max before our concluding remarks. So thank you so much for joining.
I'm Dov Ben-Shimon, and I'm the CEO of our Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West. I'm so grateful to be speaking with you virtually this evening to pay tribute to a remarkable man and a remarkable friend and leader of our community. As a young American Jewish college student, Bob Max bravely volunteered to go fight in Europe, knowing that the fight was where he needed to be. The fight was where he belonged. You're going to see his amazing story of a life filled with service, meaning, and leadership in just a few moments. But in our many conversations, Bob always stressed that when times were hardest in Europe, in battle, in the forced labor camp, it was his home, his family, his roots here in Jersey, and his desire to return to them that kept him going. I also love the fact that, newly married to the love of his life, Shirley, they knew together that building their lives around the Jewish community was the right choice for them. Bob and Shirley's story of leadership, of service, of bringing people together is the story of Jewish New Jersey. It's the story of Greater Metro West. It's the story, in some ways, of us, too. I had the immense privilege and distinct pleasure to meet with Bob quite a few times in the past years. His wonderful storytelling and his mission inspired so many of us, and I think will continue his legacy for many years to come. I'm so grateful for that fact and for the chance for us to celebrate it together this evening. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Wendy Max, Bob's daughter, and I am delighted to be here at the showing of my father's documentary. He was so proud of this documentary. He was just delighted when he was approached about making it, and he was thrilled with the final product. He would be honored that so many of you are here today to watch the debut of this wonderful documentary. My father's war experience, I think, really colored the rest of his life. He ended up devoting himself to service to the community, to the Jewish community, but not just the Jewish community. He was gave of himself in so many different ways. He was also a wonderful father. I mean, he was a role model of service and dedication and love for his family. He was a wonderful grandfather. He has five grandsons, and he had a different relationship with each of them. With one, he was the entrepreneur. With another one, he was the jazz lover. With another one, he was the person with curiosity about everything in the world. He was very proud of his family, and as I said, he really was devoted to his community, and particularly the Jewish community, though not only the Jewish community. So I hope that you will find this this film today to be inspiring and educational, informative. That's what he wanted. He wanted to spread the word about his experiences so that people would learn from the past and that it wouldn't be repeated. Thank you all so much for coming today.
Well, Leo, it's so great to talk to you today.
It's good to see you too.
I wanna ask a little bit, what is the twinning program and why it's important?
It's important, first of all, so you can share Holocaust survivor stories with, there's Holocaust deniers out there, so it's important that before they all pass, that the stories are told from a first-person point of view, and you can learn about their story and share it at your bar mitzvah or bar.
Or share it with
Share it with your family.
And I can share with other people.
For my mitzvah project, I was paired with Bob, as we had similar personalities, so I was allowed to share his story.
You didn't get to meet with Bob because of COVID, so how did you learn about his story?
I ordered on Amazon his book, The Long March Home, and I got to learn about everything he did. We also talked to his son after he passed.
So when you heard Bob's story, what really inspired you? What is his story?
He enlisted in the army in the Battle of Bulge as a Jew, which is pretty brave. He had the Jewish star on his dog tags, so if he was captured, would not be good for him.
Right.
And yeah, it's pretty inspiring story.
Bob not only fought for the United States in World War II, and you mentioned his bravery in wearing a Jewish star on his dog tags to identify himself as Jewish because he was proud of his heritage. But then really the unthinkable happened and he was captured. Did you read about that in his book?
I did read about that.
What happened to him then?
He was put into a slave labor camp. He later escaped though, thankfully, so we could share his story.
Oh my gosh, I'm glad you got a chance to learn about him, and I'm really glad I got a chance to learn about him through you, so thanks, Leo.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Doug, Bob's son. I want to thank you all for participating in this tribute to my father. Yesterday, I saw a story about a woman in a school district that wanted to make sure that if there was a book on the Holocaust, that there was a book teaching the opposing view of the Holocaust. And I know if my father was alive today, he'd be horrified to hear that. He worked his whole life for his family, his community, but first he fought for his country. And when he spoke about his wartime experiences, with kids, I know he was the happy. Knowing that his story was heard and would be remembered. His story spoke about what happened to him, but it also happened to millions of others, many of whom did not have a voice. More than anything, I know he wanted to leave the world a better place, and he did. He would have preferred leaving it a world without bigotry, without anti-Semitism, without racism. But that fight is still continuing. For all those of you who knew my father and heard his story and understood why he told his story, I hope you will, as he would have wanted, tell others so there's no question about how, if we let our guard down, horrible, horrible things can happen. My father's story would never have been told were it not for many, many of you who supported him through his life, and particularly with the telling of the story. My mom in particular, he could not have done it without her. And the reason he tells of why he started speaking about his wartime experiences is right in front of you, beneath me, my eldest son, Xander, who started asking him about the war. And that apparently got him started. Xander?
Yeah, I just wanted to share a fond memory I have with my grandfather. I remember when I was a kid, we would oftentimes go to the Poconos to visit them and spend time together as a family. One particular trip, we went fishing, as we oftentimes did. And I remember this one time I caught a lot of fish. And it wasn't particularly surprising to me. But the way my grandfather tells it was that I set a record at this lake, Wallenpaupack, in the Poconos for number of fish caught in a particular day. I really don't know how he verified that or anything like that, but at age 9 or 10, it was just really cool to, have that story and hear my grandfather always tell that to other people. And it always made me feel special. So that's one memory that sticks out to me. And then, I think my brother would also like to share a story.
So, first of all, I just want to say how my grandfather was the most loving and generous person I think I've ever known in my life. He never missed an opportunity to give someone and myself something that they needed or provide warmth just to everyone around him. Uh, one thing we often bonded about was our shared love for track and running. I ran track in high school, and he ran through much of his adult life, even winning awards in the Senior Olympics for various sprinting events. I remember how fondly he reminisced over these times while we hung out in the basement among those medals and other symbols of his many achievements in his life. This is something I always admired in him, his ability to stay active and engaged, even still completing his daily push-up routine every day until he passed. My grandfather is a constant source of inspiration for me in all aspects of my life, and it was an honor to be present in his life for so long. And I would also like to just say thank you to everyone who's supporting this tribute. Appreciate that.
I'm Hannah Orden. I'm the rabbi at Congregation Beth HaTikva, a synagogue that Bob Max was instrumental in founding 25 years ago. Bob was a role model to me and to so many other people. He taught me that you can live a full and meaningful life no matter what your age. And he also taught me that you can overcome pain and illness and any obstacle if you have a passion and a mission. People would ask Bob how he stayed young and active well into his 90s, and he would always answer with one word: engagement. Engagement is a perfect word to describe Bob. He was engaged with his family, his synagogue, his business, the wider Jewish community. He played music. He wrote a book about his experiences in World War II, and he became a bar mitzvah 3 times. Bob often said that He really should have died during World War II as a slave laborer for the Nazis in the freezing cold with little food and little clothing. But he managed to escape and survive, and then he made the most of every moment of the precious life that he was given. The thing that meant the most to Bob was to be able to tell his story to groups of young people. He wanted to ensure that future generations would not forget the Nazi atrocities and make sure that things like that could never happen in our world again. The film is a wonderful tribute to Bob, and those of us who knew him were inspired by him, and now through this film, people who did not have the opportunity to know him will also have a chance to be inspired by him.
Hi, my name is Harriet Gimbel, and I've had the privilege of meeting and getting to know Bob Max, a true war hero, an instrumental advocate for the Jewish community, and a very dear friend. It was a typical workday. I was sitting at my desk when a distinguished-looking gentleman walked by. This was not an unusual occurrence, as I had seen Bob many times before and knew that he was very involved with Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West, where I worked. On this particular day, Bob stopped by my desk and we started chatting and kibitzing. I enjoyed our conversation so much that I soon found myself asking Bob to meet me for lunch. Little did I know what an amazing person Bob was, what a special friendship we would develop, and the impact that he would make on my outlook of life. We continued meeting for lunch. He loved telling me stories and taught me so much about giving back, leadership, and the responsibility of being Jewish. I was truly enchanted by his intellect, storytelling, and knowledge and passion for life and the Jewish community. Bob's stories were riveting and always captured my attention. He made me realize the importance of my work and how much more I could really be doing to be more like him. Bob had written his own memoir and was anxious to have it made available for all to read. I was so touched to have played a small part in helping get his story published. This taught me the importance of keeping these vital stories alive for future generations. Bob's actions always encouraged me to get more involved and be a better person. I am so proud that I had the opportunity to cook Bob a Shabbat dinner of chicken soup and matzo balls and brisket. We enjoyed it together at his home. I knew that the time we spent together brought us both so much joy. Aside from his stories and great knowledge, Bob's friendship taught me how caring for others makes one's own life so much more rewarding. Bob is a true all-around hero who is deeply missed.
Thank you so much for joining us on this special evening in honor of Mr. Bob Max, Kristallnacht, and Veterans Day. We hope you will join us again on December 8th for our author insight with, as we hear from author Heather Dune McAdam, the author of 999, The Extraordinary Young Women of the First Official Jewish Transport to Auschwitz. I know that Bob, along with Shirley, of blessed memory, are certainly smiling upon us this evening, and they are so thrilled for the impact that this film has made. Thank you again for joining us.